London, 1888. They called it the Season of Lights, but for Lady Eleanor it was a prison sentence. History tells us that women of the Victorian era were silent, obedient, and fragile. But history is written by the winners. Tonight, we are looking at the untold truth of a woman who didn't just run from an arranged marriage, she ran straight into the belly of the London underworld. She thought she was escaping a monster in the ballroom, only to find that the devil himself was following her. And he wasn't there to bring her back. He was the only thing standing between her and a shallow grave. This is the story of Eleanor Vance and the ice-cold Duke. The air inside the piercingly bright ballroom of the Sterling estate tasted of stale lavender and desperation. It was the height of the season, a time when human beings were traded like cattle under the guise of civility. Lady Eleanor Vance stood near the velvet drapes, her knuckles white as she gripped her fan. She was 22, a dangerous age for an unmarried woman in her circle, but tonight was supposed to be the end of her freedom. Across the room, Lord Archibald Sterling was laughing. The sound was wet and grating, like a saw cutting through bone. He was 50 years her senior, a man whose fortune was built on the suffering of coal miners in the north. He was also the man her father had sold her to. "He is looking at you again, Eleanor," whispered Beatrice, her younger sister, tugging on Eleanor's sleeve. "Do smile. Father says the contract is to be signed at midnight." "I am not smiling for a man who buried 3 wives before I was born," Eleanor murmured, her voice low but steady. She scanned the room, avoiding Archibald's leering gaze. Her eyes, however, snagged on something else, or rather, someone else. Standing near the double doors, detached from the swirl of colourful silks and waltzing couples, stood Silas Thorne, the Duke of Ashbourne. He was a stark anomaly in the room. While other men wore their wealth in gold chains and boisterous laughter, Thorne was a silhouette of silence. He was dressed in severe black, his cravat tied with military precision. They called him the ice-cold Duke in the tabloids. Rumours followed him like a foul smell, that he had killed a man in a duel in Paris, that he ran the darkest gambling dens in the East End, that he had no heart, only a ledger of debts owed to him. As if sensing her gaze, Silas Thorne turned his head. His eyes met hers across the crowded floor. They were grey, flat, and terrifyingly intelligent. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply watched her, raising a crystal glass of scotch to his lips in a slow, deliberate motion. It felt less like a toast and more like an indictment. "Stay away from Ashbourne," her father, the Earl of Vance, hissed, suddenly appearing at her elbow. His grip on her arm was bruising. "That man is poison. If he approaches you, you turn your back. Do you hear me?" "I hear you, father," Eleanor said, wincing. "But he isn't the one I'm afraid of." "You will be afraid of poverty if you don't charm Lord Archibald," her father snapped, pushing her forward as the orchestra swelled into a waltz. "Go. Now." Eleanor stumbled forward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. 10:45 p.m. She had 75 minutes before the signing. 75 minutes before her life was legally handed over to a man whose touch made her skin crawl. She looked at Archibald, who was waddling toward her with a predatory grin. Then she looked at the side door, slightly ajar, leading to the servants' corridors. It's now or never. "My lord," Eleanor said, as Archibald reached for her hand. She feigned a stumble, clutching her stomach. I feel faint. The heat. I must step out for air." "Nonsense," Archibald barked, reaching for her waist. "The dance is starting." "Please," she gasped. pulling away with legitimate panic rising in her throat. "I will vomit on your shoes, my lord. Just a moment." Disgust flickered over his face. "Make it quick. I expect you in the library at midnight." Eleanor didn't wait. She turned and walked, too fast to be proper, too slow to be running, toward the side exit. She felt the eyes of the room on her back, but as she slipped through the heavy oak door into the dim corridor, she risked one last glance backward. Archibald was already distracted by a waiter, but Silas Thorne was gone. The spot where the ice-cold Duke had been standing was empty. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold draught raced down her spine. The servants' quarters were a labyrinth of narrow hallways and stone floors, a stark contrast to the gilded cage upstairs. Eleanor moved with practiced efficiency. She had been planning this for 3 months, ever since the engagement was announced. She ducked into the laundry storage room. Hidden behind a stack of linens was a small rucksack. Inside, a rough woolen dress she had stolen from a maid who had been dismissed, a pair of sturdy men's boots she'd bought from a stable boy, and a small pouch containing her mother's sapphire earrings. The only leverage she had left. Her fingers trembled as she unlaced her silk gown. The heavy fabric pooled around her feet like a dead thing. She dressed quickly in the scratchy wool, pinning her hair up under a tattered cap. She rubbed coal dust from the fireplace onto her cheeks and neck to mask her complexion. When she looked in the cracked mirror, Lady Eleanor Vance was gone. In her place was just another desperate woman in a city full of them. She slipped out the back entrance, into the alleyway behind the estate. The London night hit her like a physical blow. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the cobblestones slick. The fog was thick, tasting of coal smoke and the distant rot of the Thames. She didn't head for the train station. That's where her father would look first. Instead, she turned east. Her destination was Whitechapel. Specifically, a pub called the Drowned Rat. It was a suicide mission for a lady of her standing, but she had a name. Arthur Pennyworth, her brother's old solicitor. He had written to her once, years ago, before her brother Thomas vanished. If anyone could help her sell the earrings and get passage to America without alerting her father, it was Pennyworth. Eleanor kept her head down, walking briskly. The gas lamps became fewer and farther between as she crossed the boundary from the wealthy West End into the sprawling darkness of the city. The architecture changed from limestone mansions to towering, rickety tenements that leaned over the street like jagged teeth. Shadows stretched long and distorted in the fog. Clip, clop, clip, clop. The sound was faint at first, the rhythmic strike of a cane against wet stones. Eleanor froze. She pressed herself into a doorway, holding her breath. A carriage rattled past, splashing mud onto the pavement. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding and stepped back out. Clip. Clop. It was behind her again. Distinct, deliberate, unhurried. Panic flared in her chest. She sped up, turning a sharp corner onto a narrower street. The footsteps behind her didn't speed up, but they didn't fade. They just kept coming, a steady, terrifying metronome. She was lost. She realized it too late. The street she had turned onto was a dead end, blocked by a high brick wall and a pile of rotting crates. She spun around, her hand going to the small knife she had hidden in her boot. A figure emerged from the fog at the end of the alley. He was tall, his silhouette broad-shouldered and imposing. He wore a long black coat with the collar turned up and a top hat pulled low. In his right hand, he held a silver-tipped cane. Eleanor backed up until her spine hit the brick wall. "Stay back," she warned, trying to pitch her voice low and rough. "I've got nothing worth stealing." The man stopped 10 paces away. He tilted his head, and the dim light from a distant street lamp caught the sharp angle of his jaw. "You have a very poor accent for a laundry maid, Lady Eleanor." The voice was smooth, baritone, and chillingly familiar. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The man stepped forward, removing his hat. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, but his eyes were unmistakable. Grey, relentless. It was Silas Thorn, the Duke of Ashbourne. "You," she breathed. "Did my father send you? How much is he paying you to drag me back?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He looked around the filthy alleyway, his expression one of mild distaste. He took a step closer, blocking her only exit. "Your father," Silas said, his voice devoid of warmth, "is a fool who thinks he can sell his daughter to cover his gambling debts. I am not here for him." "Then let me pass," Eleanor demanded, gripping the handle of her knife. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Silas said. He raised his cane, pointing the silver tip directly at her chest. "Because if you walk out of this alley alone, you won't make it past the next corner. You've walked into hunting grounds, Eleanor, and you have no idea what is watching you from the roofs." Eleanor looked up. On the rooftop of the tenement above them, a shadow moved. Then another. "You didn't escape," Silas said softly, stepping into her personal space, his scent of tobacco and rain overwhelming her senses. "You just changed cages. Now, are you going to put that knife away, or do I have to take it from you?" Eleanor tightened her grip on the knife, her knuckles white against the grime she had smeared on her skin. "I don't believe you," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction she desperately wanted. "You're trying to scare me." Silas didn't move. He didn't look at the rooftops. He kept his grey eyes locked on hers, his expression one of bored patience. "I don't need to scare you, Eleanor. The East End will do that on its own." As if summoned by his words, a low whistle cut through the fog. Two men dropped from the low overhang of the tenement roof, landing in the mud with a heavy squelch behind Silas. Another stepped out from behind the pile of crates near Eleanor. They were ragged, hulking shapes, smelling of gin and unwashed bodies. In the dim light, Eleanor saw the glint of a razor in the hand of the man nearest her. "Well, well," the man by the crates rasped. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, bisecting it. "Looks like a lost lamb and a fancy gent. Good pickings tonight, boys." "Redmond," Silas said. He didn't turn around. He spoke to the man behind him, as if greeting a neighbor. "I thought I told you this street was under my protection." The leader, Redmond, hesitated. The recognition in his eyes was instant, and it was followed immediately by fear. "Thorn? The Duke?" "You're interrupting my conversation," Silas said calmly. He tapped the silver tip of his cane on the cobblestones. Click, click. We didn't know it was you, Your Grace," Redmond stammered, stepping back. "The girl. She's new. We just thought—" "You thought wrong," Silas said. "Leave, before I decide to expand my holdings to include your kneecaps." Redmond signaled his men. They began to retreat, melting back into the fog. Eleanor let out a shaky breath, her knife hand lowering slightly. But then, the man nearest Eleanor, a young, twitchy lad with wild eyes, lunged. He clearly hadn't received the memo on who Silas Thorn was, or perhaps the hunger in his belly outweighed his fear. He grabbed for Eleanor's rucksack, the one containing the sapphire earrings. "No!" Eleanor shouted, slashing out with her small knife. The blade caught the boy's sleeve, tearing the fabric but missing the skin. The boy snarled and backhanded her. The force of the blow sent Eleanor sprawling into the mud, the knife skittering away into the dark. The air in the alley changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silas moved. It was a blur of motion too fast for a man of his size. He didn't run. He surged. The silver-tipped cane whipped through the air with a vicious whoosh. It connected with the boy's wrist. The sound of shattering bone echoed off the brick walls. The boy screamed, dropping to his knees. Redmond and the other man roared and charged. Silas spun, using the momentum of his coat to distract them. He drove the heavy silver handle of the cane into Redmond's solar plexus, doubling him over, then swept the legs of the third man. It was over in 10 seconds. 3 men were on the ground, groaning in the mud. Silas stood over them, barely breathing hard. He straightened his cuffs, then looked down at the boy clutching his broken wrist. "Tell your master, Bill Sykes, that he owes me for the inconvenience," Silas said coldly. He turned to Eleanor. She was pushing herself up, her cheek stinging, mud soaking through the wool dress. She looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. This wasn't the behavior of a duke. This was the violence of a street brawler wrapped in silk. Silas extended a gloved hand. "Get up." Eleanor looked at the hand, then at the groaning men. She realized she had no choice. She took his hand. His grip was iron hard, pulling her to her feet effortlessly. "My carriage is around the corner," he said, not releasing her hand. "You can walk to it, or I can carry you. But if you try to run again, I will let Redmond finish what he started. Do we have an understanding?" "You're a monster," she whispered. "I am a pragmatic man," Silas corrected, "and right now I am the only thing keeping you alive." He marched her out of the alley. True to his word, a black carriage with no crest on the door was waiting in the gloom. The driver, a mountain of a man named Barnaby Stone, sat motionless on the box, a shotgun resting across his knees. Silas opened the door and practically shoved Eleanor inside. He climbed in after her and rapped on the roof. The carriage lurched forward, the wheels clattering violently over the stones. Inside, it was dark, save for the rhythmic flash of passing gas lamps illuminating Silas's face. He sat opposite her, watching her wipe the mud from her face. "Why?" Eleanor demanded, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Why are you here? Why did you help me?" Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a silver flask. He took a drink and offered it to her. Eleanor slapped it away. He shrugged and capped it. "I didn't do it for charity, Lady Eleanor," he said. "I did it because you are an investment." "An investment?" she spat. "I have nothing. My father has nothing." "Your father has a great deal of debt," Silas said softly. "Specifically, £40,000 owed to the outcome of a card game 3 nights ago, a game he lost to me." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. 40,000. "He couldn't pay," Silas continued, picking a speck of lint off his trousers. "So he offered collateral. He offered you." Eleanor stared at him, horror dawning. "He sold me to you." "Technically, yes. But then Lord Archibald Sterling stepped in. He offered to pay your father's debt to me, plus a premium, in exchange for the engagement contract. Your father, being a greedy man, accepted Archibald's offer over mine. He essentially sold you twice." Silas leaned forward, the shadows casting his face in sharp relief. "But here is the problem, Eleanor. Archibald Sterling isn't just a lecherous old man. He is a front for the opium trade coming in from the docks. He is a rival. And if he marries you, he gains access to your family's shipping licenses, the one thing your father has left of any value. I cannot allow Sterling to have those ports." "So I am a pawn," Eleanor said bitterly, "a piece on a board." "Yes," Silas said, brutally honest. "But unlike a pawn, you have a choice. You can go back to Archibald, marry him, and let him use your family name to smuggle poison into this city, or you stay with me," Silas said. "You disappear. You let the world think you are dead or lost, and you help me destroy Archibald Sterling from the shadows." "And why would I trust you?" Eleanor asked, her eyes narrowing. "You're a criminal." "I am," Silas agreed, "but I am an honest criminal. I don't pretend to be anything else, and I never break a contract." The carriage took a sharp turn, throwing Eleanor slightly forward. She caught herself, staring at the man who held her life in his hands. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the only place where a duke and a runaway bride can hide," Silas replied. "To the Devil's Acre." The carriage ride lasted an hour, winding deeper into the slums than Eleanor had ever dared to imagine. The buildings here were ancient, leaning together like conspiring crones. The fog was so thick it pressed against the carriage windows like white cotton. They stopped in front of a massive, nondescript warehouse near the docks. It looked abandoned from the outside, the windows boarded up with rot-resistant timber. Barnaby Stone opened the door. "We're here, boss. Clear street." Silas stepped out and offered his hand again. This time Eleanor took it without hesitation. She was cold, tired, and her spirit was frayed, but her mind was racing. If Silas wanted to destroy Archibald, and she wanted to escape Archibald, perhaps their interests were aligned. For now. Silas led her to a side door. He unlocked it with a heavy iron key. Inside, Eleanor gasped. The interior was nothing like the exterior. It was a cavernous space, warm and dry, lit by modern electric bulbs, a rarity in London. The floor was polished concrete, covered in Persian rugs. Walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and filing cabinets. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk, and behind it, a wall covered in maps of London, pinned with different colored markers. It wasn't a home. It was a war room. "Welcome to the Iron Ledger," Silas said, removing his coat and handing it to Barnaby. "This is where the real business of London happens. Not in Parliament, but here." "You live here?" Eleanor asked, looking around at the strange mix of luxury and industry. "I exist here," Silas corrected. He walked to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed one to her. "Drink. You're in shock." Eleanor drank greedily. "You said I could help you destroy Archibald. How?" Silas sat on the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "Archibald keeps a ledger. A black book of every bribe he pays to the police, every judge he owns, and the location of his warehouses. If I get that book, I can burn his empire to the ground in a single night. And once he is ruined, the marriage contract is void. You will be free." "And where is this book?" "That's the difficult part," Silas said. "He keeps it in a vault in his private study. A vault that requires 2 keys. He wears one around his neck. The other... Where is the other?" Silas looked at her, his gaze intense. The other key was entrusted to his solicitor. Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. "Who is his solicitor?" "A man named Arthur Pennyworth," Silas said. Eleanor dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, shards of crystal skittering across the rug. "Pennyworth," she whispered. "No, that's who I was going to meet. He was my brother's friend. I was going to him for help." Silas's expression softened, just a fraction. It was the first crack in the ice she had seen. "I know, Eleanor. That is why I intercepted you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of newspaper. It was dated 2 days prior. He handed it to her. Eleanor's hands shook as she read the small headline in the bottom corner. "Solicitor found dead in Thames. Apparent suicide." "He didn't kill himself," Silas said quietly. "Archibald found out Pennyworth was losing his nerve. He had him killed. If you had gone to his office tonight, you would have found Archibald's men waiting for you. Eleanor sank into a leather armchair, the newspaper crinkling in her fist. The last thread of hope she had clung to, the kindly old solicitor who used to give her lemon drops, was gone. She was truly alone. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked up at Silas. "So the key is gone," she said. "No," Silas said. Pennyworth was a smart man. He knew he was marked. Before he died, he mailed the key. But he didn't mail it to me, and he certainly didn't mail it to the police. Silas walked over to her, crouching down so they were eye level. He mailed it to the only person he trusted to do the right thing. He mailed it to your brother, Thomas. "Thomas is missing," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "He has been gone for 2 years. Everyone says he died in Africa." "He isn't in Africa," Silas said, "and he isn't dead. My spies found a trail. Thomas is here, in London, hiding in the rookeries of 7 Dials. He has the key, Eleanor, but he won't come out for me. He thinks I'm the enemy." Silas paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. "He will only come out for you." Eleanor stared at him. The scope of Silas's plan was suddenly clear. He didn't just save her from the alley. He saved her because she was the bait, the only bait that could lure her brother out of hiding and secure the key to destroy Archibald. "You want me to go into 7 Dials," Eleanor said slowly, "the most dangerous slum in the city, to find a brother who might not even recognize me." "I will go with you," Silas promised. "I will protect you, but you are the face he needs to see." Eleanor looked at the shattered glass on the floor. Her old life was like that glass, broken, irreparable. She could not go back. She looked at Silas. For all his coldness, for all his manipulation, he had told her the truth. "I'll do it," Eleanor said, her voice hardening into steel. "I will find Thomas. I will get the key, but on one condition." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "When Archibald is destroyed," Eleanor said, standing up and smoothing her ruined dress, "you will give me the £40,000 my father owed you, in cash, so I never have to depend on a man for my survival ever again." A slow, genuine smile spread across Silas Thorne's face. It transformed him, making him look less like a devil and more like a fallen angel. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing his head slightly, "you drive a hard bargain." "But," agreed. "Then let's go," Eleanor said. "Not tonight," Silas said, standing up. "Tonight you rest, because tomorrow we enter 7 Dials, and tomorrow the real hunt begins." He turned to walk away, but stopped at the door. "And Eleanor?" "Yes?" "Sleep with the door locked," he said. "I trust my men, but I don't trust the world. And you are a very valuable asset." As the heavy door clicked shut, Eleanor looked around the strange, fortress-like room. She was trapped in the dark with the ice-cold Duke. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a player in the game, and she intended to win. Dawn broke over London like a bruise, purple, grey, and swollen with rain. Inside the iron ledger, Eleanor Vance had not slept. She sat by the electric lamp, stitching the tear in her wool dress with a needle and thread Barnaby had provided. When Silas Thorne emerged from his private quarters, he was a different man. The severe tuxedo was gone. In its place, he wore rough tweed trousers, heavy work boots, and a flat cap pulled low. He looked like a dock foreman, hard and weathered. "Leave the dress," Silas said, tossing a bundle of clothes onto the desk. "Put these on. In 7 Dials, a woman in a dress is a target. A boy in trousers is invisible." Eleanor unfolded the bundle. It was a set of mechanics' coveralls and a heavy, oversized coat. She didn't argue. She went behind the folding screen and changed. When she emerged, tucking her hair up into a cap, she looked small but scrappy. Silas nodded in approval. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, pearl-handled derringer. "Do you know how to use this?" "My brother taught me to shoot tin cans at the country estate," Eleanor said, weighing the cold steel in her palm. "Tin cans don't bleed, and they don't shoot back," Silas said grimly. "Aim for the chest. Don't hesitate. If you hesitate, you die." They left the warehouse through a tunnel that ran beneath the street, emerging in a coal cellar blocks away. Barnaby Stone stayed behind to guard the base. This was a mission that required stealth, not brute force. Seven Dials was a notorious junction of 7 streets, a swirling vortex of misery where the police rarely dared to patrol. As they crossed the boundary, the smell hit Eleanor first, a pungent mix of frying fish, open sewage, and gin. The streets were teeming with life despite the early hour. Costermongers shouted prices for rotting vegetables, barefoot children darted through the mud stealing apples, and women with hollow eyes leaned against doorframes. Silas moved through the crowd with a predator's grace. People stepped out of his way, sensing the danger radiating from him, even in his disguise. Eleanor stuck close to his shadow, keeping her head down. "Keep your hands in your pockets," Silas murmured. "And don't look anyone in the eye." They passed a gin palace, where a fight had spilled out onto the street. A man was being beaten with a chair leg. Eleanor flinched, her instinct to help flaring up. Silas grabbed her elbow, his grip like a vice. "Walk," he ordered softly. "You cannot save everyone, Eleanor. We are here for Thomas." They turned down a narrow alleyway called Lumber Court. It was darker here, the buildings leaning so close they blocked out the sky. Silas stopped in front of a decrepit boarding house. The sign above the door hung by a single rusty nail. "The Rookery." "He's on the 4th floor," Silas said. "Room 4B. My spies say he hasn't left the room in 3 weeks." Is he safe?" Eleanor asked, fear tightening her chest. "He is alive," Silas said. "Safety is a luxury no one has here." They entered the building. The staircase creaked ominously under their weight. The air inside was hot and smelled of sickness. On the second landing, a dog barked viciously from behind a closed door. When they reached the 4th floor, silence reigned. Silas signaled for Eleanor to stand back. He didn't knock. He pulled a thin metal pick from his pocket and worked the lock. With a soft click, the door swung open. The room was small, lit only by a single tallow candle guttering on a crate. The windows were blacked out with newspaper. In the corner, huddled on a filthy mattress, lay a figure. He was thin, skeletal almost, with a tangled beard and wild hair. He held a bottle of cheap spirits in one hand and a pistol in the other. "Thomas," Eleanor whispered, stepping into the room. The man on the mattress jerked awake. He raised the pistol with a shaking hand. "Stay back!" His voice was cracked, unrecognizable. "I told you I don't have it. Tell Archibald I don't have it." "Thomas, it's me," Eleanor said, pulling off her cap. Her golden hair tumbled down. "It's Eleanor." The man froze. He squinted through the gloom, the pistol wavering. "Elle?" No, she's at the estate. You're a ghost. Another ghost sent to haunt me." "I'm real, Thomas," she said, tears spilling over. She rushed forward, ignoring Silas's warning hand. She knelt by the mattress and took her brother's free hand. It was ice cold. "I ran away. I found you." Thomas Vance stared at her, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Slowly, he lowered the gun. A sob racked his chest, and he collapsed into her arms. "Elle," he wept. "Oh God, Elle, you shouldn't be here. This place, it eats people." Eleanor held him tight, looking up at Silas. The Duke stood by the door, his face unreadable, watching the street through a crack in the blackened window. "We have to go," Silas said, his voice cutting through the reunion. "We aren't safe here." Thomas stiffened. He looked up, seeing Silas for the first time. His expression shifted instantly from relief to pure, unadulterated hatred. "You!" Thomas spat, pushing Eleanor away and scrambling back against the wall. "What is he doing here? You brought the devil to me?" "He helped me, Thomas," Eleanor pleaded. "He saved me from Archibald." "Saved you?" Thomas laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "He's a shark, Eleanor. He doesn't save anyone. He just waits for the blood." "I am the man who is going to get you out of this rat hole," Silas said calmly. "Now, where is the key, Thomas? Pennyworth sent it to you." "Pennyworth is dead," Thomas whispered. "Archibald had his throat cut. I saw it in the papers." "And you are next," Silas said, "unless you give us the key and let us end this." Thomas looked between his sister and the Duke. His eyes darted around the room, paranoid and feverish. "I don't have it," Thomas lied. It was a bad lie. His hand involuntarily went to the loose floorboard under his mattress. Silas saw it. He stepped forward. "Thomas, don't play games. Gideon Vane is tearing the city apart looking for you. If he finds you before we leave—" Crash! The window shattered inward. A canister hissed across the floor, spewing thick, acrid green smoke. "Down!" Silas roared, diving toward Eleanor. He tackled her just as the door was kicked off its hinges. The room descended into chaos. The green smoke burned Eleanor's lungs, blinding her. She felt Silas's heavy coat covering her head, shielding her from the worst of it. "The window!" Silas shouted. "Go!" Gunshots erupted from the doorway. Wood splintered around them. Silas returned fire with a revolver he had drawn from a shoulder holster. Bang! Bang! Forcing the attackers back into the hallway. Eleanor scrambled toward Thomas, grabbing his arm. "Thomas, move!" "My box!" Thomas screamed, clawing at the loose floorboard. "I need the box!" "Leave it!" Silas yelled, grabbing Thomas by the collar and hauling him up. 3 men burst through the smoke. They wore heavy leather aprons and gas masks that made them look like insectile monsters. Leading them was a man Eleanor recognized instantly from the society papers, Gideon Vane. He was a towering brute, Archibald's personal executioner, known for his preferred weapon, a butcher's cleaver. "Get the girl!" Vane bellowed, his voice muffled by the mask. "Kill the men!" Silas shoved Eleanor and Thomas toward the fire escape window. He turned to face the 3 attackers alone. "Go!" Silas commanded, his grey eyes blazing. "I'll hold them." "No!" Eleanor cried. "Go, Eleanor!" Eleanor pushed Thomas out onto the rusted iron balcony. The rain was torrential now, turning the metal slick. They were 4 stories up. Below, the alley was swarming with more of Vane's men. "We can't go down!" Thomas panicked, looking over the rail. "They'll shoot us!" Eleanor looked up. The roof. It was a sloped slate roof, slippery and steep, but it connected to the neighboring textile factory. "Up," she said. "We go up." Inside the room, the sounds of a brutal struggle echoed. Smash. Grunt. Thud. Eleanor couldn't look back. She dragged her brother up the rusted ladder to the roof. They scrambled onto the wet slates. The wind howled, threatening to blow them off. Suddenly, the window below exploded outward again. Silas climbed out, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He moved with a limp, but he was moving. He scrambled up the ladder just as Gideon Vane leaned out the window, firing a massive revolver. Ping! Ping! Bullets sparked off the metal ladder inches from Silas's hands. He vaulted onto the roof, rolling to avoid the next shot. "Run!" Silas shouted. The 3 of them sprinted across the treacherous rooftops of 7 Dials. It was a nightmare obstacle course of chimney stacks and gaps between buildings. They reached the gap between the boarding house and the factory. It was a 6-foot jump. Silas went first, leaping effortlessly despite his injury. He turned and held out his arms. "Throw the box, Thomas," Silas yelled. Thomas, clutching a small wooden box to his chest, hesitated. He looked at Silas with deep mistrust. "Thomas, jump!" Eleanor screamed as Gideon Vane appeared on the roof behind them. Vane raised his gun. Thomas jumped. He landed hard on the factory roof, slipping on the wet stone. Silas lunged and caught him by the coat before he could slide off the edge into the alley below. Eleanor jumped next. She fell short. Her fingers scrabbled against the wet ledge. She dangled 60 feet above the cobblestones. "Eleanor!" Silas roared. He left Thomas and lunged for her. He grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. With a heave, he pulled her up and over the ledge. She collapsed onto the cold roof, gasping for air. Gideon Vane stood on the other roof, staring at them. He didn't jump. He smiled. A cruel, toothy grin. "You can run, Ashbourne," Vane shouted over the wind, "but you can't hide from the sterling money. We know where you live." Silas grabbed Eleanor and Thomas. "Come on." They didn't stop running until they were deep in the maze of the textile district, hiding inside an abandoned dye works. They slumped against the wall, soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably. Silas checked his revolver. Empty. He tossed it aside and looked at Thomas. "Give me the box," Silas demanded, breathing heavily. Thomas clutched the small wooden box tighter. "No, it's my leverage. If I give it to you, you'll kill me." "You idiot!" Silas snapped, wiping blood from his eye. "I just took a bullet for you. Vane knows we are together. We are all dead men walking unless we use what is in that box." "Thomas," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "Please, trust him. He saved my life." Thomas looked at his sister. He looked at the bruises on her face, the fear in her eyes. Slowly, his resolve crumbled. He handed the box to Silas. Silas smashed the lock with a heavy stone. He opened the lid. Inside lay a single, heavy iron key and a small leather-bound notebook. Silas opened the notebook. He scanned the pages, his eyes widening. "My God," Silas whispered. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "It's not just a ledger of bribes," Silas said, looking up. "It's a list of shareholders. Archibald isn't working alone. He's fronting for a consortium." He turned the book so they could see. "Look at the names." Eleanor read the list. Her breath hitched. Archibald Sterling, Chief Inspector Halloway, Judge Blackwood, and at the bottom of the list, the Earl of Vance. Eleanor covered her mouth to stifle a scream. "My father?" "Your father didn't just sell you to pay a debt," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "He is one of them, Elle. He's been part of the smuggling ring for years. That's why I ran. I found out. He tried to have me committed to an asylum to keep me quiet." Eleanor felt the world spin. Her father wasn't just a desperate gambler. He was a monster. He had sold his daughter to his business partner to cement a criminal alliance. "We have the evidence to hang them all," Silas said, closing the book with a snap. "But we have a problem." "What?" "Vane said he knows where I live," Silas said darkly. "The iron ledger is compromised. We can't go back there. Barnaby is in danger." "Where do we go?" Eleanor asked. "We have nowhere." Silas looked at her, and for the first time, she saw genuine fear in the ice-cold Duke's eyes. Not for himself, but for her. "There is one place," Silas said, "but it is dangerous. It is the lion's den." "Where?" "Archibald is hosting a masquerade ball tomorrow night at the Sterling estate to celebrate his engagement. To you," Silas said. "He thinks you are missing. He thinks he has won." "You want us to go to the ball?" Eleanor asked, incredulous. "I want us to crash it," Silas said. "The vault is in his study. We have the key. We have the ledger proving the conspiracy. If we can get into that vault and get the original documents, we can walk into the ballroom and reveal the truth in front of half the House of Lords." "It's suicide," Thomas muttered. "It's justice," Eleanor said, standing up. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, burning rage. She looked at the list of names again. Her father's name. "I want to see the look on my father's face when his world burns." Silas looked at her, and a dark appreciation filled his gaze. "Then we need masks," Silas said, "and we need weapons. Because tomorrow night, we aren't just going to a dance. We are going to war." The Sterling estate was a blaze of light against the dark London sky. Carriages lined the drive, depositing lords and ladies adorned in silk, velvet, and elaborate masks. They were peacocks strutting on a stage, oblivious to the rot beneath the floorboards. Inside the grand ballroom, the orchestra played a sweeping Viennese waltz. Champagne flowed like water. At the center of it all stood Lord Archibald Sterling, wearing a golden lion's mask, holding court. Beside him stood the Earl of Vance, Eleanor's father, looking nervous behind a mask of a silver fox. They were celebrating a merger, a union of families, seemingly unbothered by the fact that the bride was missing. At 11 p.m., 3 new guests arrived. They wore no bright colors. They moved as a phalanx of black velvet and lace. Silas Thorne wore a mask of a black stag, imposing and regal. Thomas, cleaned up but still gaunt, wore the simple white mask of a ghost. And between them, Eleanor wore a mask of midnight blue feathers that swept up to hide her eyes, leaving her jaw set in grim determination. "The study is on the second floor, east wing," Silas whispered, his arm linked with hers. "Barnaby and his men have cut the telegraph lines. We have 10 minutes before the police arrive. My police, not theirs." "And Gideon Vane?" Eleanor asked, scanning the crowd. "Taken care of," Silas said simply. Earlier that evening, Barnaby Stone had paid a visit to Vane's favourite tavern. Vane would be waking up with a severe headache in a coal barge heading for Wales. They moved through the crowd. Eleanor felt the eyes of her father slide over her. He frowned, tilting his head, but he did not recognize his own daughter in the confident, dangerous woman walking with the stag. They slipped out of the ballroom and up the marble staircase. The hallway was empty, guarded only by silence. They reached the library. The heavy oak doors were locked. Silas produced a set of picks, but Thomas pushed him aside. "Allow me," Thomas said. He used a thin wire, and with a click, the door opened. The library was dark, smelling of old paper and brandy. Silas moved to the portrait of Archibald's ancestor above the fireplace. He swung the frame aside, revealing a heavy steel safe. "The key," Silas said. Thomas handed him the heavy iron key they had retrieved from 7 dials. Silas inserted it. He turned the dial, left 40, right 10, left 25. The numbers from the notebook. Clunk. The heavy door swung open. Inside, stacked neatly, were the original shipping manifests. Not coal, but opium, and next to them, the signed agreements bearing the signatures of the consortium. "We have them," Eleanor breathed, grabbing the documents. "We actually have them." "Well done," a voice sneered from the doorway. They spun around. Archibald Sterling stood there. He wasn't wearing his mask. In his hand, he held a double-barreled shotgun. Behind him stood Eleanor's father, looking pale and terrified. "I knew you weren't dead, Thomas," Archibald spat, leveling the gun at them. "And I knew Thorne couldn't resist a challenge. But you, Eleanor, I am disappointed. You could have been a Duchess of Industry." "I would rather be a corpse," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "That can be arranged." Archibald cocked the hammers. "Earl, close the door. We'll say they were intruders, tragically shot while robbing the safe." "Father," Eleanor said, looking directly at the Earl of Vance, "look at me. Look at what you are doing. You sold me to a smuggler. You tried to commit your own son to an asylum. Are you going to watch him kill us?" The Earl's hands shook. He looked at the shotgun, then at his daughter. Greed warred with the last shred of his conscience. "Archibald," the Earl stammered. Perhaps we can negotiate." "There are no negotiations with rats," Archibald roared. He shifted his aim toward Silas. "Goodbye, Duke." Bang! The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, but Silas hadn't fallen. It was Archibald who screamed, dropping the shotgun. A knife, Eleanor's small, sharp fruit knife from the alleyway, was buried deep in his shoulder. Eleanor hadn't hesitated. She had thrown it the moment his finger tightened on the trigger. The shot had gone wild, shattering a vase. Silas was on him in a heartbeat. He tackled the older man, driving a fist into his jaw, knocking him cold. The Earl of Vance backed away, terrified. I didn't know. Eleanor, please, I was forced." "Save it for the judge, father," Eleanor said coldly, clutching the documents to her chest. Outside, whistles blew. The sound of heavy boots thundered up the stairs. "My men," Silas said, straightening his tie, "and Inspector Reed, an honest copper." Minutes later, the ballroom doors were thrown open. The music died. The guests gasped as Inspector Reed marched Archibald Sterling, bleeding and handcuffed, and the Earl of Vance out of the room. Silas Thorne stood at the top of the stairs, unmasked. Beside him stood Eleanor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas's voice boomed, silencing the room. "The party is over, but the reading of the evidence is just beginning." 2 weeks later. The scandal had shaken London to its core. The Sterling ring was broken. Archibald was awaiting trial for treason and smuggling. The Earl of Vance was stripped of his titles and assets, currently rotting in Newgate Prison. Eleanor stood on the docks, the wind whipping her hair. She wore a simple, elegant travelling suit. Silas Thorne walked up beside her. He held a leather satchel. "The Empress of India departs in an hour," Silas said. "New York is beautiful this time of year." He handed her the satchel. It was heavy. £40,000, Silas said. "As agreed. Your father's debt, paid to you." Eleanor took the bag. It was the weight of her freedom. She looked at Silas. The ice in his eyes had melted, replaced by a quiet, intense respect. "You could stay," Silas said. It wasn't a command. It was barely a question. It was an admission. "London has too many ghosts," Eleanor said softly. "And I have a life to build. My own life. Thomas is going to manage the estate now that father is gone. He needs me to go first, to establish a trade route that is actually legal." Silas nodded. He reached out and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. He didn't kiss the skin. He kissed the air just above it, a gesture of infinite care. "If you ever need a partner in New York," Silas said, "the Iron Ledger has a long reach." "I'll keep that in mind, Your Grace," Eleanor smiled. She turned and walked up the gangplank. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew he was watching her, the ice-cold Duke standing guard until she was safe. She had escaped the marriage market. She had survived the darkness, and for the first time in her life, the horizon belonged entirely to her. Eleanor Vance didn't just survive. She conquered. In a world designed to keep women silent, she screamed. She turned her victimhood into a weapon and her fear into fuel. The story of the ice-cold Duke and the runaway bride isn't a fairy tale. It's a lesson. It teaches us that sometimes, to find the light, you have to be willing to walk through the dark. And sometimes, the monster in the shadows is the only one who sees your true worth. Eleanor got her money, her freedom, and her justice. And Silas Thorne, well, rumor has it he never took another partner again. If this story of Victorian justice and grit kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us share these untold stories with more people. What would you have done in Eleanor's shoes? Would you have taken the money and run, or stayed with the Duke? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a chapter of the darker side of history. Thanks for watching.